Is it possible that many of the modern events that you're currently living through are influenced by secret societies that came out of the fall of the Eastern Roman Empire? All that and more. Stay tuned. Welcome back to the Jeremy Ryan Slade Show. I am your host, Jeremy Ryan Slade, the CEO and co-founder of Command Your Brand. We help our clients to combat cancel culture by placing them on the right podcasts and new media. You can check us out over at commandyourbrand.com. Reminder, if you're brand new to this conversation, to like this video, leave us a comment, or smash the subscribe button if you support liberty, freedom, and want to build a better future. And guys, I am very excited for this conversation because one of you out there listening actually recommended we have this conversation today. So I reached out to today's guest and excited to have him on. So Jay Dyer, welcome to the show, man.
What's up, dude? Glad we could finally make it work out and have this conversation. Glad to be here.
Yeah, and I've been following your work for a little bit. I've become pretty good friends with Frank from Quite Frankly, and I've been in studio with him a few times, and he was always talking about your work. So great to finally connect in person, man.
Frank's great, dude. Glad to hear that.
Yeah. So for people that may not know who you are and what you do, man, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, I do a lot of film analysis. I do a lot of history. Do a lot of lectures through really dry, boring texts to kind of give people the boil down, especially from what we call the global elite. I do a global elite lecture series, which goes through a lot of their works over the last 100 years. So we've lectured through in the past, say, 8 or 9 years, maybe 60, 70, 80 of those texts, white papers, think tanks, NGO productions. So that gives people kind of an insight into what the elite think from their vantage point. We also do a lot of wacky kind of live events, comedic stuff, do a lot of impressions, a lot of weird comedy, weird abstract videos, that kind of stuff. I host the 4th hour of InfoWars. I did that for the last 4 years. I'm not sure if I'm still doing that, given the fact that everything's kind of still up in the air, depending upon the court cases and decisions. But hopefully I'll be able to continue doing that if things work out. And I've got 4 books out. So a couple of those cover philosophy and geopolitics. 2 of those cover the history of film and film analysis. So, so that's what I do. Also do a lot of debates, but I've done so many debates in the last 4 years. I'm kind of taking a break from debating. So
I understand you were on one of Ian Crossland's streams a few months ago, and you were debating somebody on theology. I can't remember the whole context of it, so I have experienced that.
Yeah, I don't remember who that was either, but I remember it was I remember popping on there. I was in DC for Timcast when I hopped on that stream. So yeah, I do remember that, but I don't remember what we're talking about. But yeah, we've done a lot of high profile debates with Muslims, especially. I've debated more Muslims than I ever thought I would in the last 4 or 5 years. So that was something I didn't plan to do. It just kind of came up that I had all these opportunities to debate various Muslims. And it was good because it prompted me to learn a lot about Islam that I didn't know. So that kind of changed my perspective on some of that domain. But that relates, to what we're going to talk about today with Byzantium and all that.
So I guess let's talk about that too. And because we've spent a lot of time on this show talking about the Roman Empire. I guess just you don't know a ton about me. My background is my undergrad degree was in Catholic theology, and then in grad school, I studied Roman emperor worship cults. I guess a whole different opposite side of things. So then I've been talking a lot about the Roman Empire the last year. We were talking about the 3rd century crisis, because I think a lot of those things are very similar to what we've been dealing with now politically in some ways. But I guess when we look at Byzantium and the Eastern Roman Empire, for those of our listeners out there that are going to give me a hard time if I say it differently, I guess, how does that kind of connect to, I guess, the movement of religion through the empire, and kind of how does that connect in terms of history with the empire?
Well, one thing I'll say is I'll defer to you on a lot of the historical stuff. I'm not a expert in that area. I do know a lot of church history. I know a lot of history of Byzantine theology. Those are the areas that I focus on quite a bit. Church fathers, philosophy, but a lot of the probably stuff that's old hat to you, I may not know about.
Sure,
but I know a lot of that in relation to, like I said, the history and philosophy of the church. So the way that it intersects with Byzantium is that as you know, the Western Roman Empire collapses, around 400, 410 with the barbarians invading, and the empire had already shifted its capital to Constantinople, or what we call Byzantium, or what becomes Byzantium. But they actually just they thought of themselves not as Byzantium, but as the Roman Empire. And so
that's why they thought it was real weird when the Holy Roman Empire popped up, because they're like, wait, we're the Romans. What is this thing? Who's this guy?
Who's
anyway.
Charlemagne? Why is there another? Yeah. And so because there was already kind of a recognized, Christian imperium with the Byzantine imperium kind of being the seat of the empire. And there's a lot of theological, political machinations behind why we get Charlemagne, and we get the Franks kind of rising up to have a lot of power in that region. And that ties actually into the history of the Filioque discussion. There's a lot of political motivation behind having a different version of the creed that was tied to political power. So if Charlemagne and the Frankish theologians wanted to have power, they naturally wanted to have people accepting their version of the creed, which added the Filioque clause that the Holy Spirit proceeds from the Father and the Son. And so that's part of the rise of that conflict between the West and the East, which comes to its culmination in 1054 with the split between East and West. But the theological division had already been happening by the time of St. Photius in the 800s. You already had people like him, the most famous theologian in Byzantium, writing treatises against the Latin theology, the Latin approach to the addition of the creed. But that's totally different from where I was going. What I was thinking of, though, was the similarities to today. I think there's a lot of parallels with Islam when we look at the rise of Islam, where it comes about, how it comes about. I believe, and even modern Oxford historians kind of back up the thesis that actually some of the church fathers of the 7th and 8th century talked about, people like St. John Damascus. They argued that really Islam arises out of the influence of Nestorian, Arian, and Judaic theology and philosophy that influenced Muhammad to kind of create, and it may have even been multiple people, not just one guy, but there might have been a sort of a circle of warlords that helped to kind of create this new religion, this new sect, which is really a deviation of Christianity. It's kind of a Christian sect. So a lot of Byzantine influence, even if Muslim theologians or historians don't recognize this. You see this in the domes, even in the architecture, prostrations and prayer. A lot of those things, I would argue, come out of actually Byzantine Christianity. And so Islam ends up being this kind of new force, so to speak, that is a challenge to Christianity, especially, and to Christendom and to the Imperium. And that's, of course, what would lead to, as you know, the Crusades. So I'm kind of wandering, but the secret society element, I would argue, if you want to get really academic, the best book I've seen on this actually isn't a historian or a secret society expert per se, but it's a history of ideas guy. And it's a pretty recent Cambridge text, and it's called Radical Platonism in Byzantium by Sinisioglu. And this was a really important text because I didn't even understand that when Justinian, for us, he's Saint Justinian, when he shut down the Platonic academies in Byzantium, he did that because the Platonic academies were, first of all, anti-Orthodox Christianity. They had this sort of undercurrent to pass on a kind of a secret mystery tradition. This goes back to early Platonic theology and philosophy, which you can see this in the Orphic mysteries. You can see this in some strands of Neoplatonism, that they had this idea of a kind of inner mystery religion that they wanted to pass down. So it necessitated secret societies. So when Justinian and then later emperors ban the Platonic academies in Byzantium, this causes them to go underground. And so they again revert to a more intense secret society setting. And the most famous of these guys is a guy named Plethon. And Plethon was the premier atheist Platonist of the Byzantine Empire. And his ideas basically transfer into Western philosophy through the avenues. This, again, is not a conspiracy. This is actually according to mainline experts in this domain, historians of ideas, I should say, through the mystery schools and hermetic principles that pass into the rabbinic traditions, into Spinoza, and then into the Illuminists. So the actual Bavarian Illuminati, Weishaupt, etc., were literally influenced by the atheistic underground secret society, Neoplatonists, atheist Platonists of the Byzantine Empire. I think that's kind of the key to understanding perhaps what the Templars discovered or what their real secrets and mysteries were. It was probably, in my opinion, something relating to this kind of Platonic Gnostic philosophy. I know there's a difference between Platonism and Gnosticism, but just for the sake of kind of convenience, I'm going to link the two. And that's, I think, kind of where you get this tradition of speculative Freemasonry passing on the very same ideas. And I would argue if you read somebody like Albert Pike in Morals and Dogmas, for example, the Morals and Dogmas, there's an entire chapter on what the real history of Christianity is from his perspective as a Mason. And he actually argues that it is Neoplatonism. So I don't think it's accidental that he's basically repeating the same mysteries of some of the Illuminists and the Jacobins who had this exact same atheistic Platonic philosophy. A lot of the communist Marxist socialists also have the same ideology going on. So I would argue that's what's really going on.
I guess when we look at that, then, like, what are these ideas and how do they, I guess, moving through history then connect with kind of modern events? I guess let's kind of start with what the ideas are first and how they connect modernly.
Yeah, so if we go back to the ancient Greek philosophers with Plato, Plato is really kind of working with the tradition of what are called the pre-Socratics. And so this is people who, or the Ionian school of philosophers, they're on the Greek islands, and they're kind of trying to figure out how to explain the world, and they're metaphysicians. So they think that what exists or what's real or what's out there is going to be the ultimate narrative to make sense of the world. And so you get these famous guys like Empedocles, and you get Heraclitus and Parmenides, and they come up with these different ideas. Like Parmenides says, all is permanence. And Heraclitus says, no, all is fire. So they're basically trying to find one thing that is all things. And Plato kind of comes after these guys, and he thinks that they all kind of had some good points and insights, and he wants to synthesize all those guys. So Platonism, as we know it today, is a kind of mystery school philosophy, you could argue. It's also very similar. Plato was influenced by the Orphic mysteries because his teacher was Socrates, and Socrates and Plato were both interested in Pythagoreanism and mathematics and geometry kind of being the secrets to explain everything. And so Platonism, in short, argues that ultimate reality is transcendent. It's this sort of abstracted realm. And this world is a lower diminished status world. It's what's called ontologically diminished. And so we as individuals are kind of striving in our particularity and our individuality and in our attachment to this world and to the world of change and flux to get back to this ideal realm of permanence, of stasis, of fixity, of immobility, of unity. And so everything that's many, that is changing, undergoing time, those are all bad and sort of imprisoning statuses. And so we want to try to it's a flight back to that realm. That's the basics of most sort of Platonic schools. So when Christianity comes on the scene in the period of first, second century Roman Empire, as it spreads, this is a challenge to some of these Hellenic metaphysical assumptions. And I would argue, as certain Orthodox theologians argue, that many of the church councils, or what are called ecumenical councils, those actually happen on the basis of a lot of Hellenic metaphysical assumptions that are challenging Christian theology. There's many places where Christian theologians utilize insights and tools from Greek philosophy and so forth, but the main challenges, whether it's the Arians or whether it's the Nestorians or whether it's the whatever iconoclasts, they're all operating on quite often either Platonic or Aristotelian or other dialectical assumptions from Greek philosophy to challenge Christian theology. That comes to the fore, as we said, with St. Justinian in the Byzantine Empire, and he operates on that principle, the Fifth Ecumenical Council, and afterwards when they ban the Platonic Academy, with the idea that they could stamp out this mystery school tradition that would challenge the idea of the goodness of history, the goodness of creation, the incarnation of Christ. You know, if God stepped into time and space and took on a body, then it can't be evil. But for the Greek dialectical mind, that's absolutely impossible. How could the ultimate principle be in time and space? He's opposite that, or it's opposite that. It could never be part of or participate in its opposite. So there's these dialectical assumptions of Greek philosophy that undergird the impossibilities of what any philosopher could admit for theology. And that's why there's this battle within the Byzantine theologians between the philosophers and the theologians. And ultimately, in Byzantium, the theologians win, but the mystery schools go underground. And in other religions, I would argue too, like even Islam, also have these kind of mystery school traditions as well. Sufism is very close to this. It's a very Neoplatonic version of this. The Ismailis, the Shia Muslims are very Neoplatonic. They're very
well. You could even look at it's interesting too, because if you look at Alexander the Great, kind of had it coming both ways, right? Like he's a student of Aristotle. Aristotle's a student of Plato. Then he goes to the East and he's experiencing Zoroastrianism and things like that. So and if you look at kind of even early emperors liked emulation of Alexander. That was a big important point for them. So it's kind of interesting how you can kind of see it coming in on both ends.
Yeah, I agree. I think Marcus Aurelius saw himself as the incarnation of the principle of reason. If you read the Meditations, he sees the necessity of the Roman Empire to be the force that is the governance of reason and law on earth to the nations, and so it provides civilization through reason, through logos. Anyway, I tend to start rambling through this stuff, so I apologize.
Well, no worries. But I guess when we're looking at this idea so we've kind of got the idea of Neoplatonism and how it works. How does this then connect to like modern secret societies? You mentioned, Adam Weishaupt with the Illuminati, and you mentioned the Masonic tradition and things like that. So how do those ideas get influence these groups, and then how does that modernly take into account with our modern world?
So, with the outlawing of the Platonic Academy and these different secret societies in Byzantium, they just kind of went underground. And I would argue that helped to develop sort of the network of the usage of various symbols and cryptography to identify, people who are in your society or your group, or this helps foster the ethos of the secret societies. I'm not saying there weren't secret societies prior to that. Obviously there were.
Sure.
And we just did a lecture through the Cambridge Companion to Western Esotericism, and a couple of the really good entries in there were the Eleusinian Mysteries and the Platonic mystery schools, because they really had a lot of the same elements of secret initiation rites, symbols, markers, etc., that mark you off from the profane masses. So that's always been there. It's just that I think the modern versions of it can be traced to that. So when we look at speculative Freemasonry that emerges in 1500s, 1600s in Europe, and then eventually it's sort of codified at the Grand Lodge in England in 1717 or whatever it is, that's a codification, I would argue, of this Renaissance and Byzantine era of trying to keep the Platonic mysteries kind of alive. And the reason they're a challenge to the existing systems is that the idea is that essentially you and your individual mind are kind of like the direct path or vision of God. So the idea that there's a church or that there's a state or any of these kind of things, they become unnecessary if the Platonic idea is true, because everything is essentially just a manifestation of the one. So there's no such thing as nature and grace. There's no such thing as church and state. These kind of institutions lose their status, their viability. But ultimately, if you're consistent with it, all this realm as a whole does. I mean, this realm is kind of an illusion anyway. So it just depends on how far you want to go with that. But those networks and secret societies that existed in Byzantium, and there is a connection, by the way, between the fall of Byzantium and a lot of the ideas actually moving to Florence and places in Italy, Renaissance Italy. One of my Orthodox priest is a specialist in that area. He's an expert on Renaissance era aesthetics and the schools of art, like how they passed on that tradition. And some of that tradition, that you see in sort of the Renaissance masters, actually comes from some of the heritage of Byzantium. And that's because they want to preserve a lot of these ideas and works and books and philosophies. Anyway, so there's a direct sort of trek between the fall of Byzantium, a lot of these ideas and principles and schools moving to Italy, and then the Italian Renaissance, and afterwards, admittedly having a very close affinity with Neoplatonism. I mean, the Medicis, Pico della Mirandola. This is where you also get the rise of Kabbalah and Christian Kabbalah. So there's a direct connection there, I think, between those ideas.
That's interesting. It's like so cyclical because it kind of makes its way to the Byzantium, then back into Italy, and then kind of back into modernity there.
And to the throughout the West, exactly. So a lot of the movements that we see today that we might not think of as rooted in secret societies like Marxism, socialism, actually come out of a tradition of secret societies based around Platonism. Plato was sort of the first communist. The guardian class in the Republic hold all things in common, including their wives, their children, their possessions. So that idea, which is really just for the middle tier of the pyramid in Plato's society, is borrowed by a lot of the Marxist socialists and the Jacobins, the Illuminists, and the radicals for what we're supposed to have for all society. So you could see why they would be attracted to idealism, collectivism, and the revolutionary ethos that in order to have this kind of a society, you would have to overthrow the existing institutions, church, state. So that passed very well into Masonic schools, Masonic orders, which always have included, at least in speculative Freemasonry, the rituals that stab the skull of the king, and so you're supposed to declare war on throne and altar. That's church and state, to eventually bring about the revolution, which is what? Well, it's basically liberty, equality, fraternity, right? Everybody's equal. Everybody's going to share everything in common. So, although not every Marxist socialist obviously is necessarily a part of a secret society, the history of it is bound up with secret societies.
And now, a word from our sponsors.
The Wellness Company and their doctors are medical professionals you can trust. And their new medical emergency kits are the gold standard when it comes to keeping you safe and healthy. This medical emergency kit contains an assortment of life-saving medications, including ivermectin, Z-Pak. Rest assured, knowing that you have emergency antibiotics, antivirals, and antiparasitics on hand to help you and your family stay safe from whatever life throws at you next.
So you can support the Wellness Company by heading over to twc.health/JRS. That is twc.health/JRS. Get up to 15% off select products. Support the Wellness Company and help support this show. Thanks again.
So I guess when we look at it modernly, I guess there's kind of two parts to this then, Jay. There's who modernly is pushing these ideals. And I guess the second part of that would be, are all of them actually aware of it? Do you know what I mean? Like, I think some may be pushing those ideas because other people are and they're not aware of it. So I guess when we look at it modernly, like, who does this apply to?
I argue, and then there's historical texts that back this up. Jessica Harlan Jacobs wrote a book called Builders of Empire that probably the most prevalent effect that any secret society had on the modern world would either be Marxism, socialism, and or the British Empire. Because if you look at the history of Freemasonry in the British Empire, it kind of functioned like the intelligence apparatus of the British Empire. It was very closely bound up with the British East India Company as well. So I think modern Freemasonry via the British Empire is a great example of the way that the world was kind of restructured under that time period through, really, I think secret societies are kind of more accurately kind of called like spy networks. That's a better approximation of what they really are. And I would argue that OSS, CIA, British intelligence, all of which were kind of created by people who were open Fabian socialists. Fabianism is a kind of Fabian socialism, another kind of secret society / public society, just like kind of Freemasons are. They're not identical, but they have similar goals. There's a British Empire used Freemasonry as its public sort of spy network to build the empire and run it. And that actually goes back to the ancient world. I mean, Pharaoh. You go back to the ancient world Egyptian. There's a great book written by a Byzantine historian, Father Dvornik, wrote a whole history of espionage, and he argued that you have to look at the way Pharaoh had a cult, and the Pharaoh cult of ancient Egypt was actually run by priest spies and mailmen. So his mailmen were the ones that were out running and delivering the mail that were also his spies. And that was a very effective way to control the empire, as well as the priest class being his spies too. So that's the same modus operandi of the British Empire. They did that with a lot of the Anglican ministers of the British Empire were also Freemasons and also spies. I'm reading a book right now that's actually really good on the history of British spies. It's called Black Gold Spies. And this is how they sent out spies, many of whom were under religious missionary priest cover to be spies for the British Empire for oil at the turn of the 1900, 1905, this time period. So anyway, those are a couple examples of where we'd see huge, large-scale secret society influence on the modern world. A lot of, for example, Templar ideas, or what's the mythos of the Templar, that passed into Freemasonry. Whether that's accurate or not is up for debate. When we go and read the Council of Vienne, when it talks about why the Templars were condemned, I think even the Vatican apologized about 20 years ago to the Templars, because I guess they were kind of admitting that it was the King of France and the Vatican that were kind of making up these wild claims that the Templars were.
Well, and it was during the Avignon Papacy too, where Philip, I think it was Philip the Fair, was that the right? Philip the Fair owed the Templars a lot of money because they were like the bankers in that period of time. So I guess the best way to get out of that loan was kill the people he owed the money to.
That's a good, but that doesn't make necessarily that I think the Templars are good guys. I just think that's the reality of how these networks function. But that was absolutely correct. That was a time when the Templars were getting a lot of power, and perhaps were a kind of a challenge to these structures that you're talking about for wealth and controlling the money supply and all that. So yeah, I think that's definitely true. And but whether or not Freemasonry, for example, is a legitimate successor to the Templar mysteries, I mean, who knows? But how does that connect to, like, when we look at like modern groups out there, then we look at like, our World Economic Forum and groups like that, like, is there any association between these things? Are they kind of new creations? How does this all work together? So again, I think that the basic structure of a secret society, you can see that very closely parallels with the structure oftentimes of modern intelligence agencies. So they actually come out of older secret societies, or they're oftentimes explicitly called secret societies. So there's a similar structure there with the people who set them up in these other countries and who kind of know about this stuff. Many of them were Freemasons, especially in the British Empire. The British Empire is who they sent their spies over to set up the US OSS, because that's the sort of inner party secret governance model that ruled the British Empire, that they wanted to set up for America to bring it back under the aegis of the British Empire. So that's one example of an overlap, but it doesn't necessarily mean that everybody in OSS or CIA is necessarily part of a secret society, although they may be. For example, the early recruits of the OSS, a lot of them came out of Skull and Bones, which is a secret society at Yale. Other secret societies as well provided recruits. Harvard has their versions of secret society. There's Scroll and Key. There's a lot of these different things at colleges, universities that function that way. So that's another example of a direct connect between, Skull and Bones and the CIA and the OSS. But with something like Davos, I think that was something created by Kissinger and the CIA for Klaus to run. And there's a history of Rockefellers and Kissinger, for example, kind of coming up with this idea of various steering committees for people to chair and to run as part of the global Anglo-American superstructure that runs the Western world. So they did this, for example, for Brzezinski. Kissinger and Rockefeller created the Trilateral Commission for Brzezinski to run. And so he was the first chairman of that back in the 70s. And then Klaus was another sort of spin-off where Kissinger helps to set that up through Harvard and the CIA. So they're kind of loosely affiliated, but that doesn't necessarily mean that Klaus has to be part of some secret society. He may be, but it's not necessary because the superstructure of the system that we're under doesn't require everybody to be in the same secret society. In fact, it's probably better that different secret societies are kind of underneath an aegis of these people who are underneath an aegis of these people, right? So that model probably functions better than if everybody was part of the same secret society.
Well, you mentioned the British Empire, and that's something it's come up on this show a number of times. I know we've done a few episodes with Richard Poe where he's connecting communism with the British Empire. We had Sean Stone on not too long ago where he was talking about a lot of secret societies coming out of the British Empire's need to kind of continue to control the world. I guess when you look at it, because even modernly, you look at even a lot of the Russia collusion stuff came out of the UK, British intelligence. How much power does the British Empire still have, and is it still trying to control things through, or is it kind of, I guess, past its day?
Well, I think the British Empire proper is gone. The last vestiges of that died after, I think, they started going bankrupt after World War I because they enacted and adopted all of these very hardcore socialist, Fabian socialist policies. And so when the Fabians came to power in the 1920s and maybe it was the 30s. It was the 30s in the UK. I was just reading about this the other day. I forget the exact date, but they almost bankrupted the UK within a few years with all of their socialist programs that they had. So that's when the US bailed out socialist Britain under FDR. No shocker there. FDR was pretty much a socialist too. So, or he was totally Fabian socialist. So from Woodrow Wilson to FDR, pretty much the US, the Western establishment had adopted this Fabian socialist ethos. That's why all the institutions that are created, IMF, World Bank, all these kinds of things, they're all based on Keynesianism, which is Fabian socialist economics. So the British Empire proper, no, it died after that, but they did set up under Cecil Rhodes and Lord Rothschild. If you read Cecil Rhodes's Last Will and Testament, it's an actual book that he wrote, this plan to bring America back under the British Empire and to restore the British Empire. So within a few decades, they realized that wasn't going to happen. But the elites that are behind that or that run that, the Royal Society, the Cliveden set, etc., Rothschilds, Milner circles, they realized that there'd be a better way to go about this than trying to resurrect the British Empire, which is just simply to set up a kind of shadow government that would run the U.S. in tandem with them, and that it would be what they called at that time the Anglo-American establishment, which now includes Israel, obviously, but that's essentially what runs the West is that superstructure, which is not the British Empire, but it's their idea to bring America back into the British Empire, but then they ended up kind of getting control of the Pax Americana, the American Empire.
Like a successor state, I guess you could say in some ways.
Through the secret security state that they'd set up, the OSS, CIA, those networks, and they aligned themselves with the biggest industrialists in America, like the Carnegies, the Rockefellers, JP Morgan, et cetera.
So I guess when we look at modernly, then how does this have an impact on, kind of where things are headed? Because, you even we mentioned before that the Russian collusion hoax came out of the UK and things like that. So how does a lot of this secret society influence the direction of where we're headed?
So I don't think they really have to utilize the old school secret societies as much as they used to, because they kind of, when Christianity or anti secret society, subversive structures were in power, they had to be more secret. But nowadays, most of those ideas they've normalized, and so they're kind of in the open. I mean, even one of their key New Age proponents, Madame Blavatsky, said that we're in the age where they could be unveiled. It's the externalization of hierarchy. So her argument was that we've been secret, now we can be open. And that was, over 100 years ago when she was saying that, maybe roughly 100. So now I think they're not so much reliant on secret societies like they used to be. And so they can rather just set up the kind of public-private steering committees that really call the shots. Bilderberg, Davos, CFR, Trilateral. Those are the things that are really still in power, still running things, so to speak. Rand Corporation, Brookings Institute, Carnegie Endowment, or there's just tons of these. They're all part of the same structure.
Yeah.
And they all have a lot of the same people. And some of those people are into secret societies. They're into Satanism. They're into the occult. But it doesn't require that all of them be. Although I believe that ultimately they're subservient to a dark spiritual force. You don't have to be cognizant of that to be in that superstructure. You've got plenty of, eggheads that write papers for the, Brookings Institute, and they don't know anything about Satanism. They just serve this system just because they've been raised in it. So yeah, I think there are still networks of secret societies, religious cults, fanatics, groups that are used. ISIS, Al-Qaeda, the Wahhabist sort of mind control, crazy Muslims are used by the West, by Western intelligence they're the kind of skeleton key for these different regions where the West wants resources, oil, land, whatever. So there's still a use for these people. For example, I covered a few years ago the famous CIA operative Miles Copeland's book, Game of Nations. He's got a whole chapter in there. He says, yeah, we love radical Muslim terrorists because we use them. We use them to, fake flag, false flag events, all this kind of, he just admits this very candidly in the book. So they're still useful, right? And that would be kind of like a secret society or kind of like a cult. For example, Aleister Crowley, the most famous Satanist, was a British spy. Dr. Richard Spence has written a really good book called Secret Agent 666, demonstrating, proving that, Crowley was pretty much a British intelligence asset for many, many years. So they would use him when they needed him. So there's still a use for the secret society, the satanic stuff. Probably a lot of these cults nowadays are run by intelligence operatives, handlers, etc. A lot of the neo-pagan cults, for example, we've seen in the last 10 years, FBI provocateur and utilize these neo-pagan far-right groups to agitate, to do terror. So that's another example of these sort of religious cult networks or secret society groups that are
really interesting, because it feels like intelligence at this point in time really does control everything. When you even look at it, whether it's I think that's been one of the most terrifying things when they talk about, okay, well, we're going to change this person to the FBI or change this person to the CIA, whatever it might be, and those people aren't really initiated into what these groups are trying to do, and that's terrifying to the power structure.
Yeah, I mean, I was even surprised to see, hopefully they'll follow through with it, but Trump talking about the Patel guy and listening to the Patel guy talk about what he wants to do with the FBI. I mean, let's hope, hopefully that happens. I mean, I never would have dreamed that we would even be hearing that kind of language. So even if it doesn't like follow through, like if that doesn't it's still crazy to have that level of person and that level of amplification on Twitter where millions of people are seeing people talking about stuff that, people in our sphere were called crazy for talking about for so many years. And now it's kind of like mainstream. But yeah, I think the biggest revolution in my mindset in the last several years was, I got into conspiracy stuff a long time ago in the late 90s. And then studying a lot of that at the academic level, university and grad school, you start to realize that really a lot of this is, like you said, it's run by various intelligence networks. And so once you start to understand that and how that structure works, then you can see through all the stuff. You're like, oh yeah, of course they farmed out the P-gate nonsense, the Russiagate nonsense to, British intelligence to do that. That makes it less liable for the CIA, who wanted that to be out there, and the, Hillary circles to be liable for it when obviously they were behind all that. So yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty clear once you study. Like I said, I didn't even realize the importance of like Napoleonic spies right prior to the rise of Britain finding oil. I mean, this whole book I've been reading now by this French historian, Gilles Meunier. I mean, I'm learning, every single day new stuff about how intelligence is a huge part of all this. I mean, they really made these British spies made the modern world. Like, you have to know these guys. I mean, they're the same guys that set up our deep state. So it seems to me like they're pretty important.
Well, Jay, I've really enjoyed this conversation, man, and I definitely want to have you on again because there's a lot more other directions we can go on this stuff, man.
I apologize for blabbing so much, but I didn't know.
No, but my job's just to guide you and kind of make this all work, man. I think we put together a really interesting thread here, man.
Well, let's chat again anytime you want to, man.
Yeah. So for people listening, man, how can they connect with you? How can they follow you?
Normally, hopefully this will continue. You can find me every Friday hosting the 4th hour of the Alex Jones Show. You can find me on YouTube under my name. You can find me on Instagram, Twitter. I'm also on Rockfin, which is a great free speech-based platform. And then you can find me at my website, jaysanalysis.com. You've got multiple books that you can get over there. This is my 660 pages of geopolitics and philosophy there, the Red Book. And all those in the shop are signed copies. And then you can get access to my lectures where we go through a lot of this history, a lot of these books over the last 10 years in my archives at the website.
Absolutely. And for those of you guys out there listening, don't forget to like this video, leave us a comment, and smash that subscribe button if you support liberty, freedom, and want to build a better future. I will catch you guys next time.